Hello, it's me. That's right, it's Marianne Taylor, aka the House Detective, and this is the Detective Diaries, where I take you through my top 5 finds out of my research over the last couple of weeks. This episode, if you love lost railway stations, this is the episode for you. I'll be discussing South Brisbane Junction railway station and where it was and a bit of its backstory and what it's called now. Do any of you know? Comment below if you're playing at home. I'll also be talking about a woman that had quite an unusual occupation. I'll be discussing a lady that had the coolest name I think I've ever come across in my research and her connection to a well-known Brisbane architect. I'll also be talking about flat registration records that are held at Brisbane City Council archives and how I've used them in the past to help uncover information about either houses that have been used as flats in the past or buildings that were built as flats. But the final segment, you will want to stick around for that. I was sent some photographs of an incredible interwar flat building. It's at Kangaroo Point. It's called Cliffside. It is a spectacular building and the interior will blow your mind. I've got secret special access to the inside of this building that you would not normally get. I'll be talking about the construction and the fascinating history of this building as well. I hope you enjoy watching. I hope you find it interesting, and I really hope that if you do and you want to watch more, that you'll click subscribe. I would be very happy. I'd also be very happy if you hit that like button. Thanks for watching. Let's get straight into it. I researched a house at Annerley recently and I discussed some of its backstory in the last episode, so I will put a link in the description and at the end of this as well if you want to go back and watch that after this one. But one of the residents of this house really interested me. She lived in the house in the 1940s and she interested me for 2 reasons. The first one was her name, the second one was her occupation. So the woman I'm talking about was Mary Buchanan Bruce McCulloch. Now, Bruce and Buchanan are obviously incredibly unusual middle names for a woman, so I was really intrigued about where they had come from. Now, often when you hear unusual middle names like that, it can sometimes be either the mother's maiden name or some other family connection like that. And this was the case in this situation. So I put together a quick family tree as part of my research and I discovered that Mary's mother's maiden name was Bruce and her maternal grandmother's maiden name was Buchanan. So they had incorporated both those names into her middle names when she was christened. So that explained that. If you know your Queensland heritage architects, there was actually an architect based out of Ipswich called Bruce Buchanan. Random side tangent that has absolutely nothing to do with this story. Okay, the second element was Mary's occupation. Now, on a electoral roll, her occupation was given as commercial artist. Now, this is a very unusual occupation to find anywhere, let alone for a woman in the 1930s and 1940s. I looked into her work a bit further and unfortunately I couldn't find any examples of her work or any commercial drawings or artworks that were attributed to her, except for one. She had done a drawing of General Auchinleck during the Second World War. Now, I've probably completely mispronounced that surname, but anyway, it's not important. This drawing was actually selected to be printed on the cover of a series of writing pads. So this series were going to feature a number of different Allied commanders during the Second World War. They had run an article about this in the newspaper, and they had included a copy of Mary's drawing. So I was absolutely thrilled to find that. And look, I pretty much know zero about art, and I have just as much talent, but I thought this was a pretty impressive sketch for a 25-year-old, quite an accomplished sketch as far as I can tell. Maybe some of you will know more about art and will be able to agree or disagree with that. Mary, she actually went by May, I'm not too sure why, but she went by May. She married a gentleman called Leonard Gillespie in 1943, and they had a son the following year. Now, like many women of the era, she appears to have given up her work when she married, and her occupation changes from commercial artist to home duties on the electoral roll. Now, home duties was basically what they called a stay-at-home mum. We all know that it is a full-time, more than a full-time occupation, but that was how women's roles were often recorded on electoral rolls. And I won't get into it here, but often women chose to record that as their occupation when they were also undertaking full-time careers. And it really bugs me because those two words, home duties, can completely negate amazing things that women did. So research Kilburney Homestead, for example, the woman who single-handedly pretty much ran that property didn't record herself as a grazier like her brothers. No. She recorded her occupation as home duties. Anyway, end rant. Back to the story. So May Gillespie had married and had a child. She then retired from her work. Now, at a time where a lot of women didn't have specialised careers, a lot of middle and upper class women would have just stayed at home and been supported by their father or their parents until the time they married. It was quite unusual for women to have a specialised occupation like this, very uncommon. There were other cases. There's some female architects, for example, that were practicing in the 30s and 40s, but it was remarkable enough that it stuck with me and I wanted to look into it further. I just thought it was really interesting, and I really wish I could have found more of her art to show you here, but also just to compare them and to have a good look at them, because she must have been quite talented to work in that industry in that time period, I think. Now, many of you who have either followed my social media or who have been watching a few of these videos will realise that I spend a fair bit of time at the Brisbane City Council archives. They're basically my second home. I love going there. You never know what you're going to uncover, and they hold such a great range of records for researching your house. When I'm researching a house and I discover that it has been divided into flats at some point, or I'm researching a building that was built as flats, there are some extra records at Brisbane City Council archives that provide a wealth of extra information beyond what you'll normally find on a property. So there's two sets of records mainly here. So there's building cards, which I actually use pretty much in the course of researching any house. I would have talked about these previously, but basically they're an old form of development application, and each property had one of these cards, or more than one card if they had a lot of development work. And on the cards, they would record any applications to undertake building work on the house or building or whatever it was. So they're a really valuable source of information. They date from roughly between 1946 and the early 80s, and they're really useful for tracking changes to buildings. And on these cards, what you will find is if a house has ever been converted for use as flats, that will be recorded on there. It will also list how many residents the flats were approved for, which can sometimes give you an indication of how many flats it was split into. It will give you the dates that it was registered as flats. It will, every year, if you're renewing your registration, it will list that so you can track how long it was used for flats. The other records that I love at the Brisbane City Council archives are the building registration records. So the building cards list the dates of registration renewals. These are the supporting documents that underpin those. So as a matter of course, when people were registering flats, council employees would go out and inspect the buildings. They would have a look. They'd often take photos. sometimes draw up a floor plan, and all of these records can sometimes be found in these flat registration files. So I've used them successfully for two that stick in my mind. One was a house at Sandgate, massive big house, but at one stage it had been split into two flats. The registration file had original floor plans, which were really useful because the house had been renoed and the floor plan had been altered, and we were trying to work out what the original layout was and what the original areas were. It also had written descriptions of the number of rooms, the number of bathrooms, the number of toilets, the sewerage connections, number of bedrooms, all that kind of information which can help you add pieces of the puzzle. I also use these records for a apartment building that was built in New Farm that I researched, and I've discussed that previously. It was called Edward Lodge. I'll put a link to that episode at the end of this one. But in addition to all that information I just discussed for the Sandgate house, this file also included advertising brochures for the property because it had been used as a boutique B&B. So these were a treasure trove of fabulous 1990s style graphic design, but also photographs and that type of thing, which documented the property in what I call the black hole era, which is 80s and 90s. So old enough that they're not digitized records or available online, but not old enough that they show up in archives and that type of thing. So these brochures that had photographs and information on the property from that era were incredibly useful. It also showed that originally the building had been constructed with shared bathrooms. Now this was not uncommon, and this building was built in the 1930s, and flat buildings were actually, purpose-built flat buildings were actually relatively new in Brisbane at that time, and it was really common to have units that would maybe have a little kitchenette, but then you would have shared bathrooms. So this building had male and female bathrooms, and there was no bathroom facilities in each unit. However, this flat registration file showed that that had changed. So obviously that was acceptable in the 1930s, not acceptable once you get into the 2000s to have to use a shared bathroom. So what had happened is the owners had actually added en-suites into each of the rooms, and this information was all recorded in this flat registration file. So that helped me work out what the original plans of the house had looked like and what it looked like now, what had been altered, that type of thing. But as I mentioned, it's also an insight into the changing, I guess, requirements of people that lived in flats, and also changing social standards. So it was really interesting from that perspective. So yes, just yet another reason why I love the Brisbane City Council archives. So I mentioned in the first segment about Mary Buchanan Bruce McCulloch having a fantastic name. Well, when I was researching a building at Spring Hill at the end of last year, I found a woman with, I think, the most impressive name I've ever uncovered in my research. Her name was Philadelphia Star. Isn't that incredible? It sounds like an actress from the 1930s stage name or something like that, or I don't know, a clean version of a drag queen's name without any double entendres. But I just thought that was an incredible name. And then I started to get a bit curious, as I do, about where a name like that comes from. So I started, the reason I came across her name was she was the mother of the architect that had designed this building, Francis Thomas Hall. So I started looking a bit more into Philadelphia because I was thinking that has to have been a family name, or she has to have come from America, or that was the name of the ship or something like that. But no, it turns out that Philadelphia was actually quite a popular women's name back in the day. I feel so dumb because I thought it was just the name of a city in America. It's actually kind of weird that it became a popular women's name, because it actually is a combination of two Greek words, and that is phileo, meaning love, and adelphos, meaning brother. So together it means brotherly love. So you would think maybe that it would be a guy's name. Anyway, it's a popular women's name, as I now know. But regardless of all that, regardless of the meaning, regardless of the source of the name, I just think it's absolutely incredible. It sounds amazing. Way better than Marianne Taylor. The mysterious South Brisbane Junction railway station. Now, if you look at old railway timetables and old maps of the Ipswich railway line, you will find a station called South Brisbane Junction Station. So what is the story with this station, and does it still exist? So because I used to work for Queensland Rail and I love my railway history, we're going to go back to the beginning of railways in Queensland. The first line was built between Ipswich and what was Biggs Camp. It was later changed to Grandchester, literally a Latin translation, so big meaning grand, camp meaning Chester. It sounds much fancier though, Grandchester, doesn't it? Much better than Biggs Camp. Anyway, first line was between Ipswich and Grandchester. That opened in 1865. In 1874, the railway line was extended from Ipswich to Oxley West, which is now Sherwood. And then the following year, that line was extended even further from Oxley West to what was Oxley Point. It's now Chelmer. Now, in 1875, the line was completed all the way from Grandchester into Brisbane, so what is today Roma Street Station, and the amazing old station building, yes, from 1875, is still hidden away there at Roma Street. You might have seen a previous post I did on Instagram and Facebook about that. It was extended to there, but there was still no bridge over the Brisbane River between what is now Chelmer and Indooroopilly, so people had to get off the train, jump on a ferry, cross the river and jump on a different train. Really inconvenient. So in 1876, the Albert Bridge was finally constructed across the river there, and the line completely all the way from Grandchester into Roma Street was finalised, and you could catch one train all that way. Now, the problem with the location of Roma Street Station was many. For a start, it was nowhere near the CBD, but I won't get into that. The main problem was that there was a lot of coal being brought out of the mines out Ipswich way, and it was really hard to get that from Roma Street Station to the ships that were berthed at the wharves on the Brisbane River for export. So basically what happened was the discussion started about building a railway line that would have a terminus at South Brisbane right near wharves, making it much easier to unload the coal straight off the trains into ships. So in 1884, a branch line was opened off the Ipswich line that finished up at the wharves at South Brisbane. In addition to creating the new line, a new station was created where this new branch line left the Ipswich line, and this station was given the name South Brisbane Junction Station. Not incredibly imaginative. It was the junction where you turned off to get to South Brisbane. Pretty boring name. Well, apparently the locals agreed that this was a pretty boring name, and only a few years later it was renamed Corinda. Now, the name Corinda, in turn, this is another side tangent for you, it is thought to have been the name of a property owned by Sir Arthur Palmer, so a Premier of Queensland, and it was located nearby somewhere there at what was South Brisbane Junction. But in turn, that property had been named after his huge pastoral property out at Aramac, which is kind of near Longreach, Barcaldine in, I guess, central Queensland. And it was also called Corinda. So that's thought to be the source of the new name for this railway station. There was then a residential subdivision called Corinda Estate, and the name was basically cemented for that area. As an extra bonus for you all, I thought I would just show a few photographs here that I uncovered of Corinda Station. So this was after 1888 when it had been renamed, because you can see Corinda on the name boards. These photographs dated from the 1880s and the 1890s, and they're all from the State Library of Queensland. And oh my gosh, I thought they were just so incredible. Like, if you know Corinda Station, and I'll show you some photos of what it looks like now here, it looks nothing like this. It absolutely is completely and utterly different. I actually grew up at Corindus and I used to catch the train all the time from that station, so I know it quite well. But these photos show the original brick buildings that were built on these early stations. And in fact, the only one of these that survives, I think, is at Oxley. It's on the State Heritage Register, I think. But my favourite photo out of these by far was the photograph of the railway staff. How amazing is this? So check out the guy in the bottom right. He basically is how I picture Captain Ahab from Moby Dick, right? He looks exactly like a, salty sea dog, seafaring captain. But the young guy in the middle at the front, oh my gosh, what a poser. He just looks like the biggest character, doesn't he? He just thinks he's so suave. But I thought this was amazing because it's actually quite rare to get photographs of people from this era, with the exception of railway staff. They did actually take quite a few photos of their staff, but I just love this and it really brought the station to life because these were the people that actually worked there. So absolutely love these photos. I thought you'd be interested to see them too. And I'll put the links to them in the description below so you can go and have a look or download them if you like as well. So not only have you seen these incredible old photos of Corinda Station, but you now know that it was originally called South Brisbane Junction Station, and you know why. One of the things I love about the amazing community that I have built up on my social media and through this YouTube channel is that people often get in touch and want to share their excitement over things they've discovered, or they want to share photos with me about really cool places. So this is what happened recently. A lady got in touch with me because she wanted to share some incredible photographs of the interior of Cliffside Apartments. Now, if you don't know these apartments, I will forgive you, because although they're absolutely incredible and have an amazing story behind them, they're actually really hard to see. So they're located next to the Southeast Freeway on the eastern side, and they're actually quite near to Lamb House or Home, if you know that. They're right near the Kangaroo Point cliffs, but they're actually lower down on the cliffs, and it's actually quite hard to see them from anywhere but the river or the freeway. But you really should know the history of these flats. They're one of my favourite flat buildings in Brisbane. As I said, they're called Cliffside, and they were designed by a well-known Brisbane architect and engineer called Ronald Martin Wilson. They were completed in 1937, and now I've kind of gone into this previously, but purpose-built flat buildings only really became a thing in the 1930s in Brisbane. Prior to that, the flats were mainly old houses that had been divided up into multiple spaces. So this in itself was a really modern building for the time, but it also, the engineering and the construction involved in this building is mind-blowing. Like, it would be difficult to construct this now, given its location, let alone in the 1930s. So, as I said, designed by Ronald Martin Wilson, and he was an architect. His father was actually Alex Brown Wilson, who had designed Home, Lamb House, right nearby here. So the Wilson family are still actually practicing architects, fourth generation, I think they're up to now. So basically architectural royalty in Brisbane. Now, it was a good thing that Ronald was also an engineer, because this site was basically a steep, rocky, solid rock cliff face with wharves and a railway line, coal wharves and a railway line at the bottom of it. So I just mentioned in that last segment about how the railway line was extended into the wharves at South Brisbane. So this is exactly what this block of land was overlooking when it was built. But the lady that bought the land, she was called Doris Booth, and she bought the land at the start of 1930. She could obviously see the future potential of this site. Now, this woman, she was one of those women I come across every now and then. Absolutely incredible. She took the stereotypes, she took the traditional roles of women, and she completely smashed them, basically. She married Charles Booth in 1919, and the couple travelled to Papua New Guinea. And she was apparently the only white woman in the Bololo Valley. I think that's how you say it. But she was not just a stay-at-home housewife. Oh, no, 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 no. She took out her own miner's rights on land there. She also became a licensed recruiter of labour. So she's setting up her own business basically in Papua New Guinea. Now, she was involved in mining and excavation. Obviously, there is probably some aspects there that shouldn't be celebrated. I know that often Indigenous workers were not treated very well. But I just wanted to talk about how remarkable she was in terms of what she did in her life. In addition to this, she also organised and managed a hospital during a dysentery epidemic in 1926 and 27. Now, she eventually went on to get an OBE for this work as well. The other remarkable thing was that she actually left her husband. So this was a time where many women stuck it out with their marriages, particularly in the middle and upper classes. So she separated from her husband, but not only that, she then proceeded to basically wrangle the entire business that they had established together from his grasp, which she was very successful at doing. So this actually ended up in a court case, and there was still a lot of debate over married women's property rights. So I won't go into it, but a number of acts had been introduced so that women who were married could still actually own their own property. This in the past had not been a thing. When you married, all your belongings, all your wealth became your husband's. You had no more ownership over it. Thank God I was born when I was. That's all I can say. So she actually went on to become a very successful mine manager and director of this company. And she was also the only female in the first and second legislative assemblies in Papua New Guinea. So she went into politics as well. Absolutely unprecedented at that time in an area like Papua New Guinea. That was in the 1950s, so let's go back to the 1930s when she decided that she was going to build these Cliffside Apartments. So she was obviously entering into a little bit of property development as well. So she bought the land in 1930. This land was actually located next to her childhood home where she'd grown up, and it was called Cliffside as well. So that's obviously the inspiration for the name of these flats. Although she commissioned these flats, she and was involved, I imagine, in the design of them in conjunction with the architect Wilson. She actually got her sister Selma Dorr to basically supervise the construction of the flats while Doris was elsewhere. So Selma not only supervised this incredible project, but she took a series of photographs of the construction of this building. So the entire process is incredibly well documented, and it just makes for fascinating viewing and incredible evidence of the building methods and materials that were being used at this time and how they actually did engineer this site. They had to excavate it all. They couldn't use explosives, so they were excavating all this rock by hand to create a flat pad basically for this 5-story building to be constructed out of brick. An incredible feat. Like I said, amazing today, let alone back in the 1930s when this was happening. When these flats were built, they were just the epitome of luxury. So as I mentioned, purpose-built flat buildings were really a modern concept at the time anyway, but these were particularly luxurious. So they were just the ultimate. They had the most up-to-date features. They had car garages. So in the 1930s, car ownership was only quite limited, but these had garages. So they were obviously designed for wealthy clientele. It's absolutely gorgeous from the exterior, this building, and it was built in the Old English style, which, as you would imagine, is kind of a tribute to traditional English houses. So you've got bay windows, you've got sort of fake shingle skirts on those bay windows, you've got kind of like angled turrety areas, and you've got some lead light windows that were used inside the house as well. You've also got terracotta roof tiles. The exterior was up to date, and it was the latest style and the most popular style of architecture at the time as well. The interiors were also amazing. There were 7 flats, and there was 6 2-bedroom flats and 1 single-bedroom flat, and the interiors of these flats were just as luxurious as the rest of the building. There was gorgeous dark timber paneling lining the walls. There was plate rails around the top. There was gorgeous dark timber floors. There was built-in furniture, that had gorgeous LED light windows. There was decorative plaster ceilings. They were just absolutely beautiful inside. And they also had a number of really cool space-saving features as well. So they had these awesome built-in dining nooks, so a couple of chairs and a table. And I do love built-in dining nooks. Love to have one in my house one day. They also had, you know, terrazzo floors in the bathrooms. They had modern features like incinerators and laundry chutes. They had up-to-date modern bathrooms with hot and cold running water. Now, this was still an incredible luxury in Brisbane at the time. Indoor toilets, oh my gosh, like areas of Brisbane still had outdoor dunnies until the 1980s. So these were just absolutely cutting edge, super luxurious, amazing modern facilities. But do you want to know what the best thing is? Not only does this building still survive, the interiors in many of the apartments are still there in original condition. Absolutely incredible. So when I was sent through these photos, I was actually really surprised because although the building was heritage listed in 2004, often the interiors do get changed a fair bit. Sometimes tenants or the owners change things without approval, and I've seen this done many times. I used to work in the development assessment area of the state heritage branch in the Queensland government. And we would see people that would just go ahead and make changes without approval, and a lot of original fabric was lost that way, unfortunately. But that is not the case in these units. So one of my favorite features is these incredible built-in kitchen cabinets. So they were designed to be double-sided, which is quite clever. So they had a front in the kitchen and a front in the dining room, and the dining room side was very beautiful dark timber with LED light windows, because that's the side your guests would see. The kitchen side was a little bit more utilitarian, but they had drawers and doors that opened through, so you could actually serve food through the cupboard directly into the dining room. Absolutely ingenious idea, space saving, having the built-in furniture. Absolutely beautiful, and they still survive in a number of these apartments. Now, the thing I was probably most surprised about though was that a number of the original bathrooms survive, including the terrazzo floors and including the original tiling. Normally bathrooms are the first things that get renovated and ripped out in these buildings, so I was super excited to see that they were still there, and I think you'll agree they're just gorgeous. Quite Art Deco in style compared to the Old English of the exterior, which was really common. That was the style of things at the time. The plaster ceilings are absolutely gorgeous. As I mentioned, the timber flooring, the dark timber paneling, absolutely gorgeous. So I was absolutely thrilled to get a peek inside these places, because I wouldn't ordinarily be able to see inside these. They're privately owned and privately occupied by different residents. So thank you so much to the person that sent me these photographs. I'm so happy that you did that, and I really enjoyed nerding out with you over how cool the photos and features are as well. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, that's it for another episode of the Detective Diaries. I hope you've enjoyed watching as always, and I'm gonna harass you again. Pretty please hit like, please subscribe, please tell people about my channel and my socials and what I do. Hire me if you'd like your house researched. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.